So thank you for having me, and it's actually great to be here. Over 10 years ago, I was actually fortunate enough to be involved with the launch of EIF, so I actually feel kind of it's a nice circle. So I wanted to go back to the question, which is what can Europe and what can people here learn from the Obama campaign, and what can be applied to this very different context. Now, before touching on the European context, a couple of things. I just want to go back to the US story that Nathaniel was just touching on, and I think that there are three things that I think are worth bearing in mind. The first one is that politicians have been using the web for quite some time in the US. And actually, if you go back all the way to 98, Jess Ventura was actually one of the first politicians to really use the web as a coordination tool to engage, to coordinate his team, and to fundraise. That was before the web was a big thing, but it proved very effective because he was the outsider. And I think when you talk about Obama's campaign, in my mind, there are two different Obama campaigns. There's the first one and the second one. And I think they teach us very different lessons. Now, the first one was an outsider who came out from an unexpected place and used these new channels to basically take over the conversation, and did so very effectively with a new message that resonated with the people who use these tools. I think if you compare that to the second campaign, the one we just saw, you had an incumbent president who had a machine in place, who had the funds, the structure, and who was kind of perfecting, I think, this machine, but in a very different kind of campaign, in a more, I would say, traditional, in the sense that it was very targeted, very kind of focused on specific messages, and actually engaging with traditional and online media at the same time. So I think we have different lessons to learn from that, but I think one lesson is clear. The web is now a core component, if not the core component, of political campaigning in the US, and will become gradually core in Europe as well. I think that's something that's critical, and I think what we've seen is the web playing the part that television did in the 1960s when Kennedy and Nixon experienced the media for the first time in that kind of place. So the question is, how do we use that learning in this particular context? Now, Europe, of course, is very different from the US, and I think most of you are thinking about that when you hear the numbers and the structure of the campaigns. We have different countries, different languages, much more complex issues to communicate. And I think there's a kind of fundamental problem at the heart of the stories that MEPs are trying to communicate, is that they have an electorate that doesn't always understand what it is they do and how their vote is going to affect what they do, and often vote on local issues rather than European issues. So there's a real challenge, and I think before we apply the same methods, we need to think, how does that change what we need to do here? Interestingly, we did some research last year of what was happening in the Brussels bubble about kind of consumption of social media, etc. And what we found, for instance, is that 70% of MEPs are using Facebook in their daily work, according to that research. You can find it on digitalpulse.eu. I'll show the link later on. And that number goes up if you see the MEPs born after 1960 to 95%. And we have YouTube being used by something like 60 to 70% of MEPs, Wikipedia being used by over 60% on political issues and campaigns. So what we see is a massive progression where these tools are being used. Now, when you go to what matters in a European context, well, the first thing is the context itself. No matter what tools you use and how much money you throw at them, if the political context is flawed, it doesn't work. So the question is, what is the story that you have to tell people and that they'll respond to and engage with? Now, what's interesting, of course, with social media is that the kind of stories that can create engagement have changed. And there are new stories that we can look at and a new kind of conversation. But it's fundamentally about a political context. So if people don't feel interested in European issues, they won't engage. Even if you have 1 million followers on Twitter, it's not interesting enough. So there needs to be a political story first, and then you need to use the right tools. And interestingly enough, as you've probably seen, it's easier to mobilize people often around negative stories, highly emotional stories. So those are the stories that often get people to join in and use the kind of channels that we're talking about. So what we need in order to connect with people on these channels are clearly articulated stories which connect with some emotion and allow some room for engagement. And I think these are three things that we need to bear in mind. Now, we've actually seen with campaigns like ACTA that actually some issues do resonate on a pan-European basis and can create a conversation and can create mobilization. So there is the potential out there for these kind of campaigns to take place. Now, if we turn to the channels, the web and social media, what's really interesting, and I think it's a thought that's often not really considered, is that this is a mass media now. It's in fact the only mass media where you can reach all Europeans. There's no single TV channel or media that can actually reach as much as the web allows you to reach. And not only does it allow you to reach the whole of Europe, but it also allows you to do that directly. So it gives you a direct connection to the voters if you can find the way to use it effectively. So it is, I think, definitely the new media that will allow debates to shift. But of course, as I said, there needs to be a new kind of politics for this to work. Now, the opportunities, I think, that are out there for politicians and MEPs are that the public is mature in terms of the use of these medias. They are on Facebook. They use a lot of these tools enough to carry a message across, enough to get involved in certain issues. And we've seen that messages can travel. If you've seen the Kony 2012 campaign that was run by a US organization called Invisible Children, they created a video that got over 100 million views. This was an example of a campaign that resonated very strongly with young people and gave them the feeling that they could do something to change the issue. So the question is, what are the issues that this audience can actually find and tap into to make a difference? I think the other thing to bear in mind in these new channels is that they offer an opportunity for openness and transparency that simply didn't exist before. You can upload your whole life on these channels and share it with your electors. I know people are reluctant to do that, but if you want to face the issue of transparency and openness, there is something that can be done. You can start sharing a lot more information about what you do, who you are, what you stand for, than was possible before. There's also some issues that affect everyone today. We have a massive financial crisis, and people are concerned about some fundamental questions about the European project. So there are questions out there. The real issue is, are we able to engage on these questions and show people that MEPs and the Parliament can be part of the solution to that? And how can they do that? So my kind of quick recommendations would be, the first one, to define a strategy that takes fully on board the role of these tools. So to define, I think as Nathaniel was saying, a strategy that really connects offline and online into a seamless campaign. And to look at how you can really use open communication, sharing, and participation, because you have a tool that allows you to create campaigners all around Europe for your causes. This is what the web is good at. It's getting people to connect to an issue and to share it on your behalf, to bring their friends on board and to mobilize them. So there's the potential to do that, but there's also the potential to do a new kind of politics, which is the politics where you start asking people how you can do a better job at connecting with them. And I think when Nathaniel talked about the matrix, I think this is clearly something that you need to master, which is how do we measure the impact of what we do. But you can also look at what you should be focusing on. What are the issues that you should look at based on what people are saying, what feedback you're getting from them. So I think there's a lot of learning to do so that you can eventually crowdsource some of your campaigning to your supporters, to the people that you want to connect with, and let them shape the campaign with you. Now, what's key to be successful is to make sure that you train yourself as an MEP, and that means experimenting, and that means trial and error, even if you don't have the $110 million to do that. You do it on a small scale, but you need to try, you need to make mistakes, you need to fail a lot before you get it right. And finally, you need to create a new political structure for campaigning. So my final advice would be to go boldly where no European politician has gone before. Thank you very much.